Okay, so let's go ahead and create this two dice roller. Okay, first let's go into our design view here. And for our dice roller here, instead of having just one image here, we're going to make it two images. So I'm going to drag a second image view here, and I'm just going to select a random dice image here. We can constrain this second one to the right side of the screen. And then the top of the second one would also go below the title. And then the bottom would go right above the roll button. So for the first dice, I'm just going to remove this right constraint from here. So now I can see both of these images on the screen. Let's run our app just to see how it looks so far on our screen. So you can see once I run my app, these two are overlapping each other. So there are two ways to address this issue. First, let me go back to our design view. A different way to address this issue is to use a horizontal linear layout. We'll go into more detail about that later on, but I just want to show you how to do this with constraints. To do this with constraints, we can reduce the size of each one of these images. Right now, the layout width and layout height is set to wrap content, which means that whatever the original size of this image was is what is going to show. But if I want to manually set the size of this image, I can just enter the size I want. So for example, if I want this to be 80 display pixels as the width, and then 80 display pixels as the height. So as you can see here, the left image is now much smaller. So definitely these two are not going to overlap now. But right now 80 pixels looks a little too small for me. And you can always play around with these height and width variables until you find something that you truly like. So for now, I'm just going to make the dice size 120 pixels for both. And right now, both of them are extremely to the left and extremely to the right. But I want to bring these two a little bit closer. So to do that, I'm just going to add some padding to the left. So I'm just going to make this about 32 pixels of padding to the left. And then for this one, I'm going to make it the same. There we go. So now if I run this app, these two images should not overlap each other. And we should have enough space around each dice over here. So now let's go back to our design view. And the new dice that we introduced into our program, we need to give this a name. So the original one was called dice image view. So just to follow the same naming convention, I'm going to name the second dice image view 2. There we go. And I'm going to add that image view into our code. Call it dice image 2. And we're going to set that dice image 2 variable to our dice image 2 name that was specified in our design view. Okay, so far so good. Now, the tricky thing here is how we're going to roll both dice, okay? And there's several ways of doing this, but let me show you two common ways. What we can do is that whenever we call roll dice, we're going to generate two random numbers, one for dice 1 and the other one for dice 2. And then we'll have two of this if and else blocks over here. So for the second set of if and else blocks, you will just check the random number 2, and then we'll just set the dice image to image according to whatever number we have in our second random number variable. So essentially, our roll dice function will look like this: 2 random numbers and 2 different sets of image changes. Okay, so we can go ahead and run our code. And as you can see, it works just like we were expecting. Each time we click roll dice, we get 2 different dice that are rolled. So I mentioned that there are 2 main ways of doing this. So let me show you the second way. First, let me stop this program. And let me undo all the changes that I've made here. Perfect. So the second way of doing this is providing this roll dice function with the image view that we want to update. So the input for this roll dice function would be an image view. Let's just call this dice image. And now whenever we call roll dice, we have to provide whichever image view that we want to update. In this case, will be both dice image and dice image 2. So now each time we roll the dice twice, one for each image. So this method requires writing less code, and it's easier to build upon. So for instance, let's say instead of just 2 dice, we want to do this for 4 different dice. Okay, so instead of having like 4 different sets of if and else blocks, we can just use this one function, and depending on how many dice we want to roll, that is how many times we're going to call this roll dice function, which those different images that we want to update. So let's go ahead and roll our dice, or let's go ahead and run our app, I should say. So as you can see, this works just like we are expecting. Every single time we roll our dice, we get a random dice roll. So hopefully you were able to solve this challenge on your own. So I won't be too surprised if you weren't able to solve this challenge on your own. If you're absolutely new to Android programming, it could be a little challenging, but the more different apps you create, the easier things get.